On September 8, 2011, I experienced something that changed my life. On that day, I was working on a pressing project. At some critical stage of the project, my colleague and I disagreed on a decision. The crux of the issue was about the allocation of resources to the project, specifically, how to allocate the limited human resources. I believed that the resources should be allocated to our team. However, my colleague disagreed and insisted that the resources should be allocated to the project he was responsible for. We had a heated debate on this issue, giving each other our respective views and reasons. This disagreement gradually evolved into an argument. After work that day, my mood became very bad. I decided to go to a nearby bar in the hope of soothing my mood. It was about 10 p.m. when I decided to drive away from the bar. This was a very dangerous and unwise decision. After I drove some distance, my eyes began to become heavy. Despite the fact that I felt tired, I did not take appropriate measures. Slowly, my eyelids became heavier and heavier. My consciousness began to become blurred. Suddenly, I heard the shrill sound of a car horn. When I opened my eyes, I realized that a car was coming towards me from the opposite side. I hit the steering wheel hard to the right. My car ran off the highway. The vehicle crossed a farm field and my body swayed uncontrollably. Eventually, my vehicle hit a tall utility pole with a terrible crashing sound. My head began to ache violently and a rush of blood blurred my vision. My life was slipping away. In that moment, I tried to stay conscious, but my body became weaker and weaker. After a while, I felt myself being drawn by some invisible force that took me into the dark unknown. Then I heard someone calling my name. With great effort, I raised my head and saw a beautiful angel. This angel had very long blonde hair that fell like a golden waterfall. Her eyes were a deep blue, clear and pure, as if they could see into my soul. Her face was full of compassion and made me feel very at ease. She wore a long, white robe. Her beauty came not only from her appearance, but also from a divine aura that transcended humanity, radiating infinite light and love. Her presence warmed me. She reached out a hand and said to me, "Come on, take my hand, we don't have much time." I didn't understand what was happening, but this was not the time to question it. With her warm gaze, I took her hand without hesitation. At that very moment, I heard a soft thud. It was as if my body was free from the bonds of gravity, and a feeling of lightness and freedom filled my soul. My soul left my body as if floating in some unknown space. Then the angel began to soar swiftly into the night sky and I felt myself being taken off the ground. I looked down and some strange creatures were staring up at me. The creatures looked so monstrous that it was as if they were from hell. Their bodies were twisted and deformed, their skin filled with cracks. Their heads were strange and terrifying, and their eyes were like blood-red flames, their pupils filled with an evil glow. These creatures seemed hostile, and their presence frightened me. They tried to approach me as if to drag me into an abyss of darkness. The angel calmly told me that these spirits were cursed. She went on to explain that I was safe here and did not have to worry about these cursed souls. Her voice gave me an inexplicable sense of peace. With her guidance, I was ready to continue my mystical journey. Curious, I asked that angel where we were going. She smiled and answered me, "I will take you to heaven." This answer surprised me because I hadn't been to church in 10 years and rarely even prayed. 10 years ago, my best friend died in a traffic accident. At that time I had prayed to God but received no answer. I became skeptical about the reality of God, which dealt a heavy blow to my faith. Secondly, I gradually lost myself in real life. The pressure of work took up most of the time. I felt that faith did not help much in coping with real problems. I felt that praying was a great waste of time. And religious beliefs had become strange and distant in my life. I didn't quite understand why I was considered a devout believer. After a while, the angel told me that we had arrived. The angel gently let go of my hand and we came to a magnificent circular building. The building was tall and magnificent and shook me to my core. The doors were beautifully carved with patterns and mystical symbols, exuding an ancient and mysterious atmosphere. As we approached the gate, it began to open slowly, as if welcoming us. I felt both excited and slightly nervous inside. But I knew that no matter what happened, the angels would always be with me. A huge building appeared before us. The building was tall and magnificent, as if it were a sacred temple. The walls of the building were very smooth and shimmered with a faint glow. As I walked into the building, my eyes were caught by an intense light. At first, the light was very harsh. I saw a huge figure sitting on a throne, and I couldn't make out his face because the light was so bright. After a while, the light gradually became softer and I was finally able to make out the man sitting on the throne. He had distinctly Jewish features. His skin looked very healthy and his hair and beard were brown. He was wearing a long, white robe. I realized that this was Jesus. He said, "Welcome, my child. All your questions will be answered in due time." This statement puzzled me. He seemed to understand my inner thoughts. He continued, "My child, you are dead now." He continued sternly, "You are drinking and then driving, and this behavior is deadly. This is not what you set out to do." I felt guilty and ashamed. I had tried to hide everything, but in this place it seemed there were no secrets to hide and everything was exposed to him. He seemed to see my confusion and he went on to say, "You are not here to be punished, your judgment day has not yet come." Then why am I here? Jesus sighed in disappointment and seemed to regret my attitude. "You are here," he said softly, "to reflect on what you have done in the past." No sooner had he said this than I saw the scene from the car accident that occurred and the images kept coming back to me. My car had crashed into another car that held a couple and their daughter. The force of the impact totaled their car and they were tragically killed on impact. The little girl ended up quadriplegic. After watching this scene, I cried out loud, "Why did you make me see this?" I felt like my insides were in agony like knives. Jesus responded, "Show you this so you can be a better version of yourself." I didn't know what was going to happen next or what this place really meant to me. I felt frustrated and self-condemned. I was a complete wreck. I began to question my existence and worth. Jesus reached out and gently patted me on the shoulder. He said, "Don't beat yourself up too much, my child. You were not brought here to be plunged into self-doubt and confusion, but to make you realize something important. Everyone has a past, everyone has made mistakes. But the past shouldn't define your future. You still have a chance to change and become a better version of yourself." I felt understood and accepted, and it was an unparalleled comfort to no longer feel alone and self-conscious. In my next conversation with Jesus, his words seemed to contain a warning. Jesus reminded me that mankind is destined to destroy mankind. You have done so countless times and will do so again. Jesus then showed me a series of amazing images, each one a part of human history. I saw ancient mankind killing each other on a battlefield. The battlefield was covered with sand and smoke, and the warriors were armed with all kinds of cold weapons. It was a brutal war, with people fighting for territory and power. The soldiers' armor was covered with blood and mud. The battlefield was filled with the smell of death. Soldiers struggled in the chaos, fighting to the last ounce of their strength for survival and victory. The scene was chilling and made me deeply feel the cruelty and ruthlessness of war. Time and again, wars in human history have brought great suffering and destruction. Then the scene jumped to the time of the Industrial Revolution, when warriors used rifles to shoot each other on the battlefield. The soldiers are wearing uniforms. It was a modernized war, and the scale and destruction of the war was even greater. I see hatred in the eyes of the warriors as they fight for their country. War during the Industrial Revolution was full of struggle and pain, and this scene touched me deeply. The scene jumped again, taking me back to the end of World War II, and I saw the horrific sight of a nuclear bomb being dropped. A huge atomic bomb exploded overhead, creating a huge mushroom cloud, complete with a devastating fireball and intense radiation. This explosion instantly destroys the city of Hiroshima, and the city is reduced to rubble. The scene jumped again and I saw an even more horrific future war. The scale and lethality of this war was horrific. Millions of people were killed in this conflict and many cities were completely destroyed. First, a huge nuclear bomb exploded in Europe. Countless people were killed in the explosion. It was a devastating disaster that caused immeasurable damage to human society. Then, another nuclear bomb exploded in South America, spreading a fiery fireball in all directions. The entire continent was gripped by war and people faced unimaginable suffering. The missiles appeared to have been launched from Asia. My heart was filled with pain and doubt, so I posed the question to Jesus, since you knew this would happen in the future, couldn't you do something about it? However, my question seemed to offend Jesus and his smile disappeared and was replaced by a surge of anger. He replied, "Why should we stop it? Most people have banished us from their lives. Most have lost their faith. Why should we save your race again?" I was shocked and puzzled. Jesus explained that my Father had wanted to destroy the human race, but in the end gave you a chance. Jesus reminded me that when I returned I should tell those who would listen that if they did not heed the advice then they would face destruction. Again, Jesus emphasized, "Now, I must return to the real world and deliver this important message." I gently nodded my head in agreement. Jesus' eyes were full of encouragement and trust. He touched my shoulder and a wave of warmth and strength infused me. After our conversation was over, Jesus began to disappear in front of me. After a while, I felt myself begin to move downward, as if I were landing on an unseen path. This process was accompanied by a strong vibration. As the vibrations intensified, I gradually returned to the real world. The process was like crossing the border of time and space. After I reconnected with my body, I heard someone tapping on my car window. I looked up at the car window and realized it was a doctor. The paramedic rushed to me and said, "Don't worry, we're here to save you." They lifted me into the ambulance and then quickly transported me to the hospital. In the hospital, I underwent a series of tests. One of them was to test my blood alcohol level. I silently thanked God because the test results showed that my alcohol level was 0. It was many years later that I was brave enough to write this article because I felt scared and uneasy. Many people would not believe what I was saying, and even I myself sometimes wondered if my experience was real. I share this story here, not to garner sympathy, but to convey a message. I know that Jesus is coming. This is an urgent and important message, and I want people to listen and respond positively.